These are 8 chapters written by a tortured, disgraced political operative in 1513 that the Catholic Church banned, that Napoleon kept annotated, and that have quietly shaped how power actually works for 500 years. Most people have heard the name Machiavelli, and almost nobody has read what he actually said. And the gap between those two things is exactly where your mediocre life lives. What you are about to receive is not motivation, and it is not self-help. This is a reconstruction of your identity using 3 of the sharpest intellectual tools ever produced: a Renaissance political manual, a 20th century psychological framework, and 2 real human lives that prove both of them work. Machiavelli shows you what the rebuilt identity looks like from the outside. Carl Jung shows you why most people can never get there. Steve Jobs and Henry Kissinger show you what it looks like when a real person actually does it. Before the principles, you need to understand where this knowledge came from, because context changes everything. Niccolo Machiavelli was born on May 3rd, 1469, in Florence, and by 1498 he was serving as head of the Second Chancery of the Florentine Republic, a senior diplomatic and administrative post that put him at the center of the city's foreign affairs. Over 40 diplomatic missions followed, sending him to the courts of kings, emperors, and popes. One of those missions placed him directly across a table from Cesare Borgia, one of the most feared men alive at the time, and Machiavelli watched everything. No library, no theory, no comfortable distance. 14 years of watching power operate up close, watching men succeed and collapse, watching the gap between what rulers said and what they actually did. And then in 1512, the Medici family returned to Florence and stripped him of everything. Arrested, tortured on a device called the strappado, arms tied behind the back, body suspended from them, and then released and banished to a farm outside the city. The man who wrote the most ruthless political manual in Western history wrote it immediately after being physically broken by the very kind of power he was analyzing. And that detail matters more than most people realize. December 10th, 1513, Machiavelli wrote to his friend Francesco Vettori, describing what he did each evening. Muddy farm clothes came off. Formal court dress went on, the clothes from his years of consequence, and he sat alone and wrote. Mentally, he was entering the courts of great men from an empty farmhouse in exile. The goal was to get his life back, a job application disguised as a political treatise dedicated to Lorenzo de' Medici, addressed to the family that had destroyed him. None of it worked during his lifetime. Machiavelli died on June 21st, 1527, without ever returning to public life, and the book did not see print until 1532, 5 years after his death. By 1559, the Catholic Church had placed it on their index of forbidden books, and by the 1570s, the word Machiavellian had entered the English language as a synonym for cunning political manipulation. What that letter from exile also tells you is something about identity. Machiavelli did not wait for permission to become the person he was building. He put on the clothes every night, alone, and inhabited that version of himself before anyone else recognized him in it. Before the 8 chapters, you need to understand why most people read Machiavelli and change nothing. The obstacle is not intellectual. You could absorb every principle in this video and wake up tomorrow exactly the same person. And the reason for that goes back to something Carl Jung identified in the 1930s. Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist born in 1875, the founder of analytical psychology, and his central insight for our purposes is this: the version of yourself you show the world is not your full self, a mask constructed over years, shaped by what your family approved of, what school rewarded, what your social environment tolerated. Jung called it the persona, everything that did not fit the mask: your aggression, your ambition, your capacity for strategic coldness, your desire for power. None of it disappeared. All of it got pushed down into what Jung called the shadow. The shadow is not evil, and correcting that misunderstanding immediately matters. The shadow is simply everything about you that was labeled unacceptable and therefore had to be hidden. And for most people that includes anger, ambition, the raw desire for dominance, the willingness to be ruthless when necessary. All of it went underground, and here is what Jung observed that connects directly to everything Machiavelli is asking you to do. The shadow does not stay buried. Unowned material runs your behavior from below the surface, without your awareness and without your permission. The things you say you would never do, the emotions you claim you do not feel, they are operating anyway, just unconsciously, clumsily at the worst possible moments. Jung described the shadow as the thing a person has no wish to be, and the process of bringing it into consciousness, what he called shadow integration, is not about becoming that thing. Owning it deliberately is the point. Choosing when to deploy it, having access to the full range of what you are, rather than only the version the world approved of. Now connect that to Machiavelli's chapter 15, which comes next. Machiavelli writes that a prince must be able to access any quality, including the ones the world calls vices, when circumstances demand it, and that the person who only ever practices the good qualities will be ruined. That is not just strategic advice. That is shadow integration with a different vocabulary. The person who has never owned their capacity for cruelty cannot deploy it when the moment calls for it. The person who has never owned their capacity for coldness cannot maintain it under pressure. The person who has never owned their desire for power will be dominated by that desire from below, in ways they cannot see or stop. Jung said shadow integration is the central task of psychological development. Machiavelli said accessing the full range of qualities is the central skill of power. 500 years apart, they were describing the same problem. Chapter 15 is the philosophical engine that powers the entire book, and understanding it changes how every other chapter lands. This is where Machiavelli commits the most transgressive act in the history of political philosophy. Standing in front of the entire intellectual tradition before him, Plato, Cicero, every Christian political thinker who had ever written about how rulers should behave, he announces, "I am departing from the methods of others." No apology, no qualification, a declaration. His reason is the concept he calls the effective truth of things, his exact phrase, which means reality as it actually operates, rather than as idealists believe it should. Everything written before him described how the world ought to work. What Machiavelli produced was a description of how the world actually works. And those two documents are not the same. The quality pairs he lists are worth sitting with: liberal or miserly, generous or rapacious, cruel or merciful, faithless or faithful, effeminate or fierce, humane or proud, frank or crafty, religious or unbelieving. Then comes the detonation. A prince who possesses all the good qualities and practices them would ruin himself. This is not cynicism, and mistaking it for cynicism is the most common way people miss the point. A person locked into a single mode of operating cannot adapt to a world that shifts constantly, and the world does not always reward mercy, honesty, or gentleness. Someone who can only be gentle will eventually encounter situations that demand something else, and they will have nothing to reach for. What replaces the fixed identity is this: the ability to access any quality when necessity demands it, and the understanding that appearing virtuous matters more than being virtuous. That is the operating system. Every other principle in this video runs on top of it, and the reason most people cannot install it, as Jung would tell you, is that half of those qualities are buried where they cannot be reached. Chapter 6 is the dividing line between people who actually transform their lives and people who spend their lives intending to. The greatest leaders in history, Machiavelli argues, were the ones who relied on their own virtue rather than fortune. And the word matters here because virtue does not mean virtue in any moral sense. Closer to capability, force of will, adaptability to circumstance, the quality of someone who acts on the world rather than being acted upon by it. 4 figures get named as the supreme examples: Moses, Romulus, Cyrus the Great, and Theseus. Biblical, legendary, historical, mythological, grouped deliberately. What connects them structurally is this: each found their people in a state of chaos or suffering, and that suffering was not an obstacle to their greatness. It was the raw material of it. Comfortable people do not want a new order. Broken people do. The distinction that carries the most weight in chapter 6 is between the armed prophet and the unarmed one. All armed prophets have conquered, Machiavelli writes, and the unarmed ones have been destroyed. Savonarola moved an entire city through the force of his preaching, and the moment Florentines stopped believing in him, nothing was left. He was burned at the stake. Moses, Cyrus, and Romulus, when belief faltered, they could compel it. That is the difference. The question for you is not about literal weapons. What do you have that does not depend on other people's continued belief in you? What have you built that does not collapse the moment someone stops being impressed? And that is where Henry Kissinger enters this conversation, because his origin story is one of the most revealing biographical illustrations of what an armed identity actually looks like in a modern life. Kissinger was born in Fürth, Bavaria, in 1923, and his family fled Nazi Germany in 1938 as Jewish refugees. His father arrived in America a broken man, according to Kissinger biographer Barry Gevin, because the Holocaust had destroyed his entire belief system, his sense of identity, everything he had constructed his sense of self around. The external world had taken all of it, and the man who had once been capable and certain was neither of those things anymore. Kissinger grew up watching that, watching weakness in a man he loved, and drawing a conclusion that shaped everything he became. At 25 years old, Kissinger wrote to his parents, "There is not only right or wrong, but many shades in between." What followed from that conviction was a career that would make him Secretary of State under Nixon and Ford, the first foreign-born citizen ever to hold that office, and would see him orchestrate the opening of diplomatic relations between the United States and China, one of the defining geopolitical moves of the Cold War. His former Harvard colleague Stanley Hoffman put it in writing in 1983. Kissinger believed that preserving the state requires both ruthlessness and deceit. The scholar Hans Morgenthau described him, like Odysseus, as many-sided. Kissinger died in November 2023 at 100 years old, and most American presidents in the decades after he left office sought his advice, regardless of party. Not loved by the public, deeply controversial, admired and formidable, until the final day. A son who watched his father's identity collapse under external pressure and spent the rest of his life building something that external pressure could not touch. Chapter 6 also carries the most honest warning about what transformation actually costs. Nothing is more dangerous to conduct, more perilous to pursue, or more uncertain in its outcome than introducing a new order of things. Machiavelli writes that directly, everyone who benefited from the old order becomes your enemy. Everyone who might benefit from the new order stays lukewarm because they have not seen it work yet, attacked by the past and not yet validated by the future. That is the transition period, and Machiavelli calls it the price, not a sign of failure. Chapter 3 deals with the mechanics of transition itself, and one of the most practically useful principles in the book lives here. New territories are harder to hold than hereditary ones, Machiavelli observes, and people rebel not because the new ruler was cruel, but because the new ruler disappointed the hopes they had when they first accepted the change. Every cycle of failed self-improvement follows this exact structure: maximum hope at the beginning, genuine energy, genuine intention, and then the new version fails to deliver quickly enough, and the old one rushes back in, not because it was better, but because it was familiar. Machiavelli's answer is stark. Either destroy the old order completely, or live inside the new one personally. Holding a territory at a distance does not work. You have to inhabit it. He also uses a medical analogy that is worth keeping. A disease treated early is easy to cure, but hard to diagnose, and left untreated, it becomes easy to diagnose, but impossible to cure. The Romans, he writes, saw troubles far ahead and addressed them while they were still small. Waiting until a problem is obvious means paying a price that is already enormous. Now consider Steve Jobs, because his 12 years outside Apple are one of the clearest modern demonstrations of how this principle operates in a real human life. Jobs co-founded Apple with Steve Wozniak on April 1, 1976, and by 1985 the board forced him out of the company he had built from a garage. Not just a job lost, the institution that had been his entire identity stripped away. What followed were 12 years that biographers now call the wilderness period, near bankruptcy building next, spectacular failures, the kind of humiliation that rewrites a person. Patrick McGee, writing about that era, describes the transformation directly. The exile turned an impulsive, volatile, know-it-all founder into an introspective leader who could trust other people and delegate. The old identity did not survive. A new one was built in its place. Apple acquired Next in late 1996, and Jobs returned as interim CEO in 1997. His first major move, cutting approximately 70% of the company's product roadmap. One decision, one clean removal, not a gradual reduction spread over time. Everything that had accumulated and become noise was gone, and only what was essential remained. The iMac, iPod, iPhone, and iPad, everything that transformed Apple into the most valuable company on earth, came after that cut, not before it. That is Machiavelli's Chapter 3 principle made operational. Jobs did not attempt to run the old Apple while quietly building a new one. He displaced the old order and inhabited the new territory himself. One clean cut, then construction. Chapter 8 draws one of the most clarifying distinctions in the entire book, and most people flinch past it too quickly to absorb it. Cruelty well used is force applied once, at the beginning, for self-protection, and then stopped. Cruelty badly used is force that begins small and grows over time. Most people default to the second structure: small amounts of pressure, small lines drawn, small consequences delivered, gradually escalating as things get worse. That approach produces maximum suffering and minimum effectiveness, because a slow escalation teaches the other person that each new increment can be absorbed. The pain never ends, the situation never resolves, and there is no moment where anything can improve. Maximum decisive force applied at the beginning, then stopped. That structure is superior on every axis. It is over, it is unambiguous, and it leaves room for something better afterward. Agathocles of Syracuse, born around 361 BC as the son of a potter, seized total political control of the city in a single morning in 317 BC by inviting all the senators and wealthy citizens to a meeting and having his soldiers kill them. Machiavelli acknowledges his capability fully and then refuses to call it glory because the means were betrayal and cruelty, and effectiveness is not the same thing as glory. That distinction matters. Cruelty is a tool here, not a virtue. Understand it, deploy it when necessary, do not romanticize it, and above all, do not let it become habitual. Applied to identity transformation, the principle is direct. The mediocre version of you will not die quietly. Negotiations will be offered, gradual changes will be proposed, one more chance will be requested. A slow, incremental death of old patterns is more painful and less effective than a single decisive severance. And jobs cutting 70% of the product line in one move is the same principle that Machiavelli is describing. Maximum force, applied once, then stopped. Chapter 17 is the most misunderstood chapter in the book, and the misunderstanding almost always comes from cutting the sentence in half. Is it better to be loved or feared? Feared, if you cannot be both. That much everyone knows. What almost nobody quotes is what comes immediately after. The prince must avoid being hated, because fear without hatred is the goal, and the way to avoid hatred is specific. Do not touch the property or the safety of the people around you. People forgive the death of a father more readily than the loss of their inheritance, because grief fades and material harm does not. The operating principle is not make people fear you. The principle is be someone whose capability commands respect, whose potential for consequence is real, and who gives no one a material reason to want you gone. Hannibal Barca tested this across 15 years of campaign in Italy, commanding a multi-ethnic army in conditions of extreme hardship, and not one internal mutiny occurred. Machiavelli attributes this entirely to Hannibal's reputation for severity. The army never tested him because they already knew what the answer would be. The contrast is Scipio Africanus, praised across history as one of Rome's greatest commanders, whose excessive mercy caused a mutiny among his own troops in Spain. Treating men too gently is its own kind of failure, because they will eventually search for the limit, and when there is no limit, they find that out. Connect this to Jung, and the picture becomes complete. Warmth without edge reads as weakness, not because the audience is cruel, but because the suppressed aggression is visible to them even when the conscious self is performing gentleness. They sense the withheld reaction, the thing not being said, and they either test it or they lose respect for the person who will not own it. The rebuilt identity does not suppress the edge. It owns it, chooses when to show it, and that choice, the visibility of the choice, is what creates genuine authority rather than performed authority. Fear in this context is not terror. Legibility is the better word. The clear, credible communication that you have a line and crossing it carries real consequences. Chapter 18 is Machiavelli's most direct case for what he means by strategic adaptability, and he reaches back into ancient myth to make it. A prince must know how to use both the beast and the man, because the world does not always respond to law and reason and ethics, and a nature built exclusively on those things will eventually encounter a situation they cannot handle. The teaching, Machiavelli writes, was encoded in the myth of Achilles being raised by the centaur Chiron, half human, half animal, because princes were always meant to carry both natures. Of the two beasts available, the lion and the fox each solve a different problem. The lion cannot defend itself from traps, and the fox cannot defend itself from wolves. Force alone walks into every trap laid for it, and cunning alone collapses the moment someone decides to use direct force. The synthesis, knowing which to deploy and when, is the actual skill. Promise-keeping gets examined directly here, and Machiavelli states it plainly. People who kept their word have been regularly outwitted by those who did not. Pope Alexander VI gets named as the supreme historical example. A man who, in Machiavelli's words, never did anything but deceive men and always found victims for his deceptions, because people are naive about the present moment and rarely see the manipulation arriving until it is too late. Reading this as lie constantly misses the point. What it says is, do not be bound by a promise when the conditions under which you made that promise no longer exist. The appearance principle is the chapter's real center. Possessing all the virtues is not necessary. Appearing to possess them is, and men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand. Machiavelli's exact phrasing, because most people see what you appear to be, and very few ever directly encounter what you actually are. The gap between those two populations is where the strategist operates. Jung becomes essential again here, because projecting composure, control, and unreadability as a performance is not possible if the opposite exists unintegrated below the surface. A person performing calm while suppressing panic will leak the panic in timing, in micro-expression, in the texture of their language. The fox and the lion are not just external behaviors. They have to be owned internally before they can be deployed externally. That is shadow integration applied to strategy. Chapter 7 is built entirely around one man, and Machiavelli's analysis of him is the most detailed character study in the book. Cesare Borgia was born around 1475 as the illegitimate son of Cardinal Rodrigo Borgia, who would later become Pope Alexander VI, Archbishop of Valencia at 17, Cardinal at 18, and then in 1498 he resigned the cardinate, the first person in recorded history to do so, and became a military commander. Between 1499 and 1503 he carved out significant territory in central Italy through a combination of force, strategic deception, and the ruthless removal of anyone who posed a threat. Machiavelli was present at his court from October 1502 through January 1503, dispatched as a Florentine envoy, writing regular reports back to his superiors. What appears in Chapter 7 is not second-hand analysis. It is the eyewitness account of an experienced political operative who studied one of the most dangerous men of his era at close range. One incident defines the chapter. Borgia needed to pacify the Romagna region, newly acquired, chaotic, lawless, and he appointed a man named Ramiro de Orco to handle it. Ramiro was brutal, efficient, and effective, and order was established through fear and violence. That changed when, in December of 1502, Ramiro's body appeared in the town square of Cesena, cut in two, a wooden block and a bloody knife placed beside it. Machiavelli writes that the spectacle left the people at once satisfied and stupefied. The architecture of that move is worth understanding fully. Borgia needed cruelty to establish order, and he used it. But the cruelty was outsourced to Ramiro, not performed directly. When the cruelty had served its purpose, Borgia destroyed the vessel that contained it, and in destroying Ramiro he reclaimed the people's goodwill by positioning the brutality as Ramiro's excess rather than his own design. The cruelty was real. The order was real. The psychological distance was manufactured, and it worked. This is what strategic behavior actually looks like. Not impulsive cruelty, not sentimental mercy, but the calculated deployment of each at the right moment with full awareness of how the audience will read it. Borgia ultimately failed, and Machiavelli does not attribute that failure to poor judgment. Fortune is the explanation. His father, Pope Alexander VI, died in August 1503 before power could be consolidated, and Borgia himself fell critically ill at the same moment. The one error Machiavelli does assign to him is allowing the election of Pope Julius II, who was Borgia's enemy. Even with near-perfect execution, one mistake under bad fortune at the wrong moment can end everything. Chapter 19 is the longest chapter in the book, and the one where Machiavelli stress tests everything he has argued against, actual historical records. The supreme dangers are contempt and hatred, not external enemies, not bad luck. Contempt arises when you are seen as weak, inconsistent, cowardly, or irresolute. Hatred arises when you violate what people depend on. Running through a sequence of Roman emperors, Machiavelli maps out who survived and who did not, and the pattern holds across every case. Marcus Aurelius died in his bed, respected by the army and the people, his consistency and genuine capability holding everything together. Pertinax and Alexander Severus were both murdered shortly after taking power, because the army held them in contempt for being too lenient, not hated, just not feared, and that was enough to get them killed. Commodus, Caracalla, and Maximinus went the other direction, murdered for excessive cruelty that gave too many people too many material reasons to want them gone. And then Septimius Severus, whom Machiavelli calls a very fierce lion and a very astute fox, a man who deceived multiple rivals in sequence, committed extreme violence, and was never loved by anyone, died of natural causes in 211 AD, the only emperor of that period to do so. The distinction Machiavelli draws here is one of the most useful in the book: love versus admiration. Love requires being liked, and being liked requires that people genuinely believe you care about them. Admiration requires only being impressive or being dangerous, and admiration remains achievable even after ruthlessness. Most people spend their entire lives pursuing love, approval, warmth, inclusion from people who are not positioned to give it and will withdraw it the moment it costs them something. The rebuilt identity does not depend on that. Admiration from the many, love reserved for the carefully chosen few. The final structural insight in chapter 19 is about conspiracy. Because princes are rarely destroyed by external enemies, internal conspirators are the real threat, and the protection against conspiracy is not fortification, not building walls. The protection is not giving people a material reason to hate you, because a conspirator who removes someone the population does not hate will not be greeted as a liberator. They will face fury. Machiavelli makes this explicit in the context of fortresses. The best fortress is not being hated by the people, and a physical fortress is useless the moment the population decides to hand it to your enemies. The most dangerous threats to the rebuilt identity will not arrive from strangers. They will come from people with access, from people who have been given a reason to want you diminished. And the structural protection is the discipline of not creating that reason through avoidable carelessness. 500 years of this framework, and the structure of what it produces is now clear. Machiavelli shows you what the rebuilt identity looks like from the outside. Jung shows you why most people never get there. Jobs and Kissinger show you what it looks like when a real person actually goes through it. From chapter 15, the first step is releasing the fixed identity, stopping the performance of a single consistent persona, and developing the capacity to access any quality when circumstances require it. In Jungian terms, this is the completion of the self, the integration of everything you were told to hide. From chapter 6, the second step is arming yourself, which means stopping the dependence on other people's continued belief in you to sustain who you are. Kissinger built his identity after watching his father's external self collapse under historical pressure. Jobs built his during 12 years of exile and failure. The transition period, when the old version is being attacked and the new version has not yet proven itself, is the unavoidable price of the process, not evidence that something has gone wrong. From chapter 3, the clean cut is non-negotiable. Inhabiting the new territory fully is the requirement, not governing the new identity from a distance, while keeping the old one as a fallback. Jobs cut 70% of the product line in one move and built everything from what remained. Machiavelli put on court clothes alone in a farmhouse every evening and wrote a new life into existence before anyone recognized him in it. From chapter 8, force is applied once when necessary and then stopped. No slow escalation, no habitual cruelty, one decisive severance from the old patterns, followed by construction. From chapter 17, developing an edge means becoming someone whose capability is legible, whose respect is worth having, because withdrawing it carries actual weight. From chapter 18, the opacity is built internally before it is deployed externally. The fox and the lion are owned, integrated, available, not performed, and the performance gap disappears when the integration is real. From chapter 19, admiration replaces the need for universal love. Conspiracy is prevented not through walls, but through the discipline of not creating the conditions for enmity, and the rebuilt identity becomes someone whose destruction serves no one's interests. And from chapter 7, the Borgia lesson closes everything. Even near-perfect execution cannot fully control fortune. What you can control is your preparation, your precision, and your willingness to act when the moment arrives. The process is the only thing within reach, and the process is worth building regardless of what fortune decides to do with it. Machiavelli wrote the most dangerous book in political history, from a farmhouse in exile, in court clothes, alone, with no audience and no guarantee of anything. Jobs spent 12 years near bankruptcy and humiliation before returning to build the most valuable company on earth. Kissinger watched his father's identity crumble under history's weight and spent a century constructing one that nothing could touch. None of them waited for the world to recognize who they were becoming before they started becoming it. The mediocre life is comfortable, approved, and predictable, and it ends exactly when you decide it does.